All right, well, let's get started. Good morning. Everybody stay cool today. The challenge today is keeping the lawn wet, especially in our neighborhood because the irrigation water got turned off.
Oh,
because
no.
of some problems. So our front lawn was hard as a rock last night. So we've been trying to soak that up. We'll see how that goes. Hi, Mark White, Idaho Estate Planning. We do estate planning. It's one of the reasons we called it Idaho Estate Planning. We also do elder law. And our effort with our clients is to be there when they need us. We would like to do some planning early on so that we at least have a backup arrangement should things not work out the way we want them. But we also work with people that are, say, working with parents that did not do that kind of planning. So we're there just in case. Joining me today is Justin Walker from Adelant Financial Group. And Justin, you do kind of a similar thing.
Yeah, we definitely do. We try to help people through the monetary issues that come along with retirement and also planning, whether that's long-term care planning or life insurance or just having enough money to live on and make it through retirement.
So Justin's shop and our shop have a fairly similar approach. The first thing we would like to do is to get to know our client, understand what their goals are, what their values are, and then, we have tools to choose from. We're going to be talking about some of that today. Justin, similar process that way as well.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. When we first started working together several years ago, we realized that our process was very similar. Understanding the client, where they want to go, maybe some of the things they've learned along the way, but more importantly, what can we do to try to help them reach goals and what they want to try to get done in this life. And it's funny how we have that same process of, you get to know the client and then you analyze and then you make recommendations and then you implement and then you continue to try to review and improve that situation as time goes on, because everybody's life changes. There's always things that change. If that's one constant we can always know, it's always going to change.
We got a question, just to clarify. Justin, tell us the name of your group.
So our company name is called Adelant. In Spanish, the word adelante means to move forward or progress. And so we have used that word as a play in what we do from a financial planning standpoint, helping clients make smart money decisions all along the way. So if it's saving money for retirement, or if it's for saving for a house or college education or whatever that may be, our job is to try to help understand the client's needs and goals and then help make those smart money decisions along the way.
Very good. So today, what we're going to try to cover is some of the different ways that you could pay for care. We've talked about in our previous sessions of this group of Zoominars, as I call it. And by the way, I get 25 cents anytime anybody else uses Zoominar, because that's mine, not theirs. They don't know that yet, but I'll send them a bill. So we've talked about in-home care, what they call personal care services, or some people call it non-skilled. Don't say that to the folks that do that, because there is actually quite a bit of skill. But when they say non-skilled, what they're talking about is medical. It's non-medical skilled. In-home care, assisted living. We also talked about skilled care, skilled medical care in-home, and in what they call SNFs, or skilled nursing facilities. And one of the things that we came away with every time is that it isn't cheap. It just isn't cheap. So we would like to talk today about one, how to think through this, maybe some things to be doing now. And you say, well, I should have been doing that 20 years ago. I hear that a lot. Well, the next best time is now because you're on it. Let's get going. Justin's going to walk us through some of the private pay possibilities, shifting that burden maybe to some companies that, you know, do this kind of stuff. And then I'd like to pick it up and talk about a couple of the, you know, governmental benefits that may be available. So Justin, get us started. Let's talk about, I think we talked generally about 3 different ways that you can pay for, you know, this type of care. Walk us through, you know, what those look like.
Well, I think number one, and you talk about this a lot, Mark, but we have a plan by default if we don't do any planning. If we go into a long-term care need later on in life, or even if it's an early onset from disability or illness, if we have not done the planning that is necessary to pay for that, which it can be very expensive, the state does have things to get into or to help pay for those things. And Mark will go into more detail about those and some of those options. But I think first and foremost, that is one of the plans by default. Whether we like it or not, we may not be able to care for our loved ones if we don't have the money. And so understanding that it does take some planning is really, really important. When we talk about the different ways to pay for any type of long-term care need, one of the things that we look at is, do we have enough money to self-insure? Sometimes if we have, you know, assets that we can distribute for long-term care, whether it's from the sale of real estate or whether that's from retirement assets, we may have enough money, depending on our net worth, in order to pay for long-term care on its own or on our own without any assistance from an insurance company or from the government. But that seems to be fairly rare. We don't run into that a lot. We've got to have quite a bit of money set aside in order to pay for a long-term care need that could last anywhere from a few months to a few years.
So Justin, one of the benchmarks that we ran into was if you self-pay and you want to stay at home, that cost can run $15,000 to $20,000 a month easily. It could be more than that. That's quite a bit of money.
Correct. And that's why I say it doesn't happen as often as you know, we may understand. You know, we've got to have quite a bit of money set aside, a few $100,000 to be able to take care of that and managed well in order to continue to pay for that cost if we're going to self-insure. So that can be an option if we have enough assets, if we come from money, or if we sold a business and we're sitting on a bunch of extra cash and we're not necessarily worried about going into you know, spending that money down and it not going to the next generation. That can be an option, but there's always other options. And I think that's one of the things that we love to talk about most is what opportunities are out there for every individual that we can leverage someone else's money. If we can leverage someone else's money and we can do it efficiently, then we can have our cake and eat it too. So that's one of the things that we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about. So in a traditional sense, in a long-term care, or you can purchase what's just called a long-term care insurance policy, a standalone long-term care insurance policy. Over the years, I would say in the early 80s and 90s, they were selling long-term care insurance, mainly insurance companies, right? Selling these long-term care insurance, but I don't think they understood how long people were going to live.
Yeah.
I think that became,
and yeah, mix the fact that we live longer, but our health isn't necessarily better longer, so that we end up needing some help for a much longer period of time. They did not have that worked out very well.
Yeah, they didn't. The underwriting that they did, many companies aren't even offering long-term care insurance any longer. they will typically uphold the insurance contracts that they have in place, but they're not soliciting any new long-term care insurance policies to the public because they found that they're losing money versus what the premium dollars that they've gotten in. And if they have done that, a lot of times those long-term care policies have gone up in premium, meaning those companies have come back and said, in order to keep this policy, you're going to have to pay X amount of dollars more in order to keep that long-term care insurance in place. So depending on what company you go with, right, there is a traditional long-term care policy that can be purchased. And there are some good companies that still offer traditional standalone long-term care policies. Those long-term care policies can be anywhere from the Cadillac of Cadillac type of policy, where it will pay so much per day, have a cost of living adjustment inside of it, that it will pay for a lifetime of benefits. So whether that's a year or whether that's 10 years in care, that policy will continue to pay. But with each of those different options comes an additional cost, a premium that has to be paid to the insurance company. And understanding for sure what a client's need is and what their wants are, most of the time it comes down to cost. What's the cost going to be of that long-term care? And the cost of the premium that we're going to have to pay today. And so deciding on how we do that, what company you go with, what kind of benefits you want to have paid out, maybe what kind of care, and maybe it's a supplemental type of long-term care insurance. Sometimes people are thinking, well, I got to go buy this long-term care insurance policy that covers all expenses. Well, that may not be necessary.
No.
You may have enough, you may have enough assets that you can say, well, I need something to supplement my long-term care event. And I think that's one of the things that we sometimes overlook. It's like, well, let's go all the way in, but we don't necessarily need to do that in all cases. There may be other options, from reverse mortgage to home equity lines of credit, because a lot of times our greatest asset we're living in, especially in our elder years. And so, you know, that's one of the things that I would suggest when we're looking at a long-term care standalone policy is it something that we have to have 100% of, or is it a supplemental type of insurance that covers for a few years? And then get legal involved and decide, you know, maybe we need to do some estate planning on top of that, right? Maybe there's some trust planning that could be taken care of, and utilizing some of the legal issues that could go along with that.
Well, yeah, the planning here is rarely one thing. It's rarely just a policy. It's rarely, oh, I got my will done, or I got my power of attorney done. This type of planning is usually, you know, encompasses a number of factors, which is why when you're looking at the long-term care policy, it seems to me that you can easily, you know, work out something that adjusts the premium maybe a little bit more affordable to you, meaning what you got, 30 to 90 day elimination period. Okay, if you can take care of that, you can drop the premium down just a little bit. And if you will do some other planning, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, you don't need a policy that necessarily goes for 20 years. I'll mention a little bit, boy, it'd sure be nice if you could get 5 years of coverage. But even 3 is very helpful for most people. So it's not that you know, there are the long-term, the traditional standalone, they are available. A lot of people, Justin, are not thrilled because they keep thinking, I'm throwing that in and then I'll never use it. I'm going to put that money in and I'll never get it back. What if I never need long-term care?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I get concerned most about when people start shopping for long-term care insurance is, do they understand all of the different benefits and riders that you can purchase within a long-term care policy? Meaning the elimination period, the time that we have to wait before the insurance company pays the benefit. And that is a changeable number when you're starting a policy. You know, it could be 90 days, it could be 180 days, we could even go up to a full year. And so understanding some of that is really good, but there's also return of premium on some long-term care insurance policies. And so when clients are worried about, well, I'm not going to get this money back if I just pass away, is there a way that I can get this money back? Some companies offer return of premium on their long-term care. But with that being said, you're going to pay for that. It's going to be more expensive. You're going to have to remember some of those things. And so working with a financial professional and understanding all of those different levels will be really important. But as you alluded to, Mark, a lot of times people are really concerned about throwing the money away, just like we do with car insurance and homeowners insurance. Sometimes we pay it because we have to. But if we don't ever have a catastrophe or an accident, we're probably not going to use it. But we have to have it. And I think sometimes long-term care insurance is looked at that way. Today, because of the changing and underwriting and the longevity of people living, insurance companies created a hybrid life insurance policy that will provide a long-term care benefit to a client if they have a long-term care need. So there are several companies that will say, yes, here's a death benefit of $250,000. You have access to 75% of that death benefit for long-term care should you need it. That long-term care benefit then can be used and used up and still provide a death benefit to the client or to the estate. And so some clients really prefer that because they feel like instead of just paying into a premium that who knows if we're going to need care like this, maybe it just as a death benefit, they get passed on to the estate tax-free. So, you know, we look at these different ways of either self-funding long-term care and or traditional long-term care insurance and or a hybrid type of long-term care policy inside of a life insurance policy. Those are the three major ways that we can help, that we typically do planning for as it pertains to a financial standpoint for long-term care. And the better, or I should say the sooner we do the planning, the more options we have. And by sooner, I mean in your 30s and 40s, right? Not waiting until you're 75, 85. But if we are waiting till then, just like you said, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is today, you know, so do some planning, whether that's early on or whether it's, oh, shoot, we should probably do something now. There's still options, but the sooner we do it in life, the more options we'll have.
Well, and it also affects the cost of what you pick. So you've got more options, but you can generally manage the pricing or the cost better the sooner you do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. The interesting thing about long-term care insurance, whether it's through a traditional sense or whether it's through a life insurance policy as a writer, when the insurance companies underwrite for long-term care, they're not so much worried about when you die, as long as you're still living and can't take care of yourself, and how long will that be? And so the underwriting for that is much different. And so if we have a knee issue or a back issue early on in life, you know, in our 40s, the ability to get approved for a type of policy like that later on is going to be nigh impossible. Because when we can't walk and we can't sit up and we can't be mobile is when other things come up that we need care. We need more help getting around. We need more help bathing and transferring and all of those other things. So the sooner we do it, the better our health is, the less that premium dollar is, and the more likelihood of getting approved for that type of insurance.
So I think one of the key takeaways right here, Justin, is the options. There's just options. And people seem to be afraid to do anything because they're worried about that the cost of long-term, you know, the traditional long-term care policy. And they can't afford it, and they're not going to get their money back. And what I'm hearing you say is, yeah, come in anyway.
Yeah.
Visit with a professional. There's so many options. Don't get hung up on your thinking now. That's your job, is to add to their thinking, to come up with
Yeah.
some options, and to help them kind of manage how this works and how much this is going to cost.
Yeah.
So
And I
get
think
going.
that's really important. Yeah, really important, because we're emotionally connected to our financial decisions as consumers. You know, we work hard for our money and we don't want to see it go to waste. And so we typically make really emotional decisions as it pertains to money, including if we go to the grocery store when we're hungry, we're going to spend more money. And I think that the thing that we have to realize, working with a financial professional takes that emotional connection away, or tries to. We are unemotionally connected to the client's money. And so we can help think about it more logically and make more psychological decisions that won't affect the client's emotional capacity with that money. And if we can help do that, there's a lot of different options in order to manipulate those monies to maybe kill two birds with one stone versus just doing one thing.
And while it never hurts to just sock some money away, you know, put it away. I'm saving money every paycheck. I'm socking it away. It never hurts to do that. But Justin, you can give them all kinds of options, make that money work for them. And like you said, maybe kill two birds with one stone, and make those decisions on a more knowledgeable basis, because this is what you do. It's not what I do, but it is what you do.
And sometimes it's overwhelming for us to look at our numbers, look at our budgets, look at our income. I have clients who don't want to review their statements. They don't want to look at them because they don't want to know how much money they have. They just want to live in this life of not knowing. And it's hard for me to understand that, because I want to know everything about what's going on in my financial world. But for some people, they don't want to know. And, you know, ignorance is bliss type of thing. But the reality is, the more we are on top of it, the more we understand it, the more we review it, the more tweaks we can make to our planning. And, you know, as we go through a pandemic like we just have gone through, people have been nervous and scared, and they've let fear take over some of their financial decisions, including investments and insurance policies and so on and so forth. But when we look at what is this really here for, and what's the long-term perspective, and why do we have these things in place, and maybe we can't afford the same thing that we did a year ago. How do we change that? How do we make some tweaks to that to continue the same path, to continue the same plan, but maybe we just make a few changes? And I think that's the thing that we want to focus on most with every client, is we don't have to blow up an entire planning, you know, for a few changes. We can make some changes to continue that process. And I think that's the greatest thing we can do for any of us, is just make sure that we have control and that we have options. And if we can make any changes along the way, we're better off.
Yeah. So again, the upshot here for me is the same thing that we do on our side. You hire a professional so that they can maybe pull you out of that emotional attachment to whatever it is. And if we have that emotional attachment and in ignorance, meaning we don't quite understand what's available to us, then we hunker down. I remember a story that my dad used to tell me about a lady that saved up all her money to go on a cruise. So she saved her money. She finally had enough to go on the cruise. But she didn't have enough to pay for meals on the cruise, or at least that's what she thought. So she took her cheese and crackers and stuff, and she was, you know, eating in her room. And then the very last night, she comes down to the big dinner, and she's ready to pay the bill. She says, "Do I get a bill?" And the gentleman sitting next to her looked at her and said, pay the bill. She goes, yeah, I had to pay for this meal. And he says, well, do you have your ticket? And she picked it up, and he looked at it and said, no, your meals are all included. For what you paid, all your meals are included. So here she was, she spent the whole week on the cruise. She was just piecing and eating little bits of stuff. And the whole time she could have been eating. Justin, you know this probably better than I do. I've never been on a cruise, but they feed you. There's food all the time, from what I understand.
There is.
You can eat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not everybody's going to be in the eat all the time, but if you don't look at the ticket and understand what's on that ticket, if you don't look at your situation, understand where you are, and visit with the professional to see what all those other options are, you're like this little gal in her stateroom, you know, trying to get by for the week so that she can have that one big meal, and it was included. So thank you. Anything else you want to add on the, we'll call this the private pay, if you will. There's the self-pay, like you said, just whatever you got, that's what we're going to use to pay for care. And maybe it's just the house. Well, there's some ways we can make that work. Got some money in accounts, yeah, we'll pay those down. Or we can leverage that a little bit. And there's some professional outfits that know how to do this stuff, and we're turning over some some of that work to them. Let's maybe jump for a second and talk about some of the public benefits. And there's two that we work with quite a bit. And it's interesting because there's a certain generation that often tells me, well, you know, I'm not going to take that. That's a handout. That's for poor people. I don't want to use a governmental benefit. Well, what's interesting with both of these is you can look at it as maybe a handout. That's fine. Not going to stop you from doing that. However, as far as the general program that's available to all people, as long as they qualify financially, this is the Medicaid program. We all put money into that program every paycheck. Every time we get paid, we dump some money into the Medicaid program. So you definitely can look at that and say, well, it's a handout, but you could also look at it and say, well, listen, I've been paying those premiums for a long time. Now, I'm not sitting here telling you that you absolutely want to do Medicaid. That's not the point, but it is available to us. So that's one of the benefits that's available. And people say, well, listen, I don't know that I want to do that. I don't want to hand out. Okay, but let's have the discussion anyway. The other benefit that we do a lot of work with is what's called the VA pension benefit. It's a non-service connected disability payment, meaning it's available to veterans or their widows, and it's not determined by having been injured during your service in the military. And so for the vets, I really personally feel that they've earned anything that they can get out of a, you know, the VA programs. That's why they're there. That's what they were set up to do. So I get those folks that say, listen, that's, you know, that's for poor folks, get it. But you know what? We might all be there at some point. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that and maybe some of the planning you can do around those two programs. So the VA benefit, some of you have heard it called aid and attendance, and that's the term that's used very often. That benefit is available to, as I said before, is available to vets or their widows. And these are vets who have served during a war period. So what does that mean? Well, that means if they were stationed down at Mountain Home, but they never left the country to go serve during a war period, in country, as long as they serve during those war periods. And those are set out by Congress. World War II, not so many of our vets left from World War II. Korea, Vietnam, those are the biggies right now. People that's a certain age and they're ending up needing a little bit more help. And then after 1990, because I don't know what you want to call that particular engagement, military engagement, but it's been going on since roughly 1990. Those folks are covered as well. So vet needs to have served at least 90 days in the military, at least one of those days during a war period. So if we're talking with a widow, her deceased spouse needed to serve 90 days with at least one during a war period. Now that sounds a little bit weird, but you know what? We have a client who served, he came in on the tail end of the World War II and was in the military for 1 week before the end of the war period as established by Congress. He qualified for veterans benefits. So what does this benefit cover? Well, no one's going to get wealthy off of this. It can add to the income that you already have. You're talking about $2,300, up to $2,300 for the vet, him or herself, and about $1,200 for the surviving spouse of a vet. So we've got to have established costs of care. That's done with the doctor. It can be done with, some other medical personnel. There's a form that they have to fill out. We have to establish costs in basically to qualify for the entire benefit. You have to show that your costs of care eat up your entire income. So what they do is they take the amount of your income and subtract it from the benefit, and whatever's left over. So if you have $2,500 a month in expenses, approved expenses, and you have $2,500 in income, well, you subtract that out and you have zero, means you get the full benefit. So for the vet, it would be about $2,300. If you have $1,500 in benefits and your income's 25, then we subtract out the 15, you'd have $1,000. Now you go over to the maximum benefit and you subtract out the $1,000. So now you'd have about, $1,300 in benefits. Now you may be thinking, well, that's not a lot because some of this is very, very spendy. Yeah, but you know what? Every little bit helps. I think, Justin, you can speak to that. Every little bit that you can add to that monthly income is helpful. And so if it's $500, we had one guy that came in, sweet little guy, didn't want much, but we got his benefit boosted by $250, and it was the best thing in the world. He was so happy. Well, it allowed him to stay at home and bring in some help, and that's all he wanted to do. So the VA benefit for our vets and for the widows of vets is really, not enough people know about it. The VA, I don't feel, does the best job in the world telling people about it. There are some things that you can get tripped up on with the VA benefit. So it's helpful to get some help as you as you go through that process. For example, the limits on what you can have as far as assets between the veterans benefit and say the Medicaid benefit, those are different. And so that's something you need to know. If you're thinking, well, I don't qualify for Medicaid, so I won't qualify for the VA benefit, you better call us. If you know somebody that is worried that they don't qualify, call us. And if we can't help you, we have the resources to make sure that we can get a vet connected and look at their situation and see if they actually qualify. It's probably, Justin, a little bit like the folks that don't call you because they don't think they qualify for any of those long-term care benefits, whether it's the traditional policy or whether it's a life insurance with a rider.
Yeah.
But my suggestion is they still call you because you don't know.
Yeah, have the conversation at least, you know, and I used to tell people, well, I still tell people, you know, we're not underwriters. We aren't the ones to choose whether or not we can do this or not. And there's lots of different varieties that we can do. And just like you said earlier, it's every little bit helps. You know, if it's $200 a month benefit, that could be huge. If we, you know, it just depends. I always say it's worth having the conversations about.
Yeah, it may for private pay for those policies that you've talked about and those products, it might affect price, but it may not affect whether or not they can actually get it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they can't get hung up on that. They got to call and ask the question. Same thing with the VA benefit. Some people call and go, well, I've got a little too much in assets. They need to call. There's some things that we can do. More particularly if you are a vet or the widow of a vet, and it looks likely that you're going to need some help, whether that's in-home or assisted living, you should call now. You should get going on this, just like Justin was saying. You know, there's more options. It affects how much you pay to do this, but there are some ways to ensure that when the time comes that you're ready to go. But we need to get going now. With the VA benefit, we need to have stuff in place at least 3 years. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you have too many assets, or what are we going to do about the house? One of the biggest issues with the VA benefit is you can qualify if you own the house. But if you move into assisted living and sell the house, the cash proceeds disqualify you. You'll get kicked off until you spend all those down. You know, that's fine too, if that's what you want to do. But if you're thinking, well, I'd like to get some, you know, assets to my kids, then there are some things that we can do, but we've got to do them prior to the 3 years. We can't wait till the night before. There's some things that we need to do. Let me talk about the Medicaid benefit for a second. We don't have the military requirements for that. And the Medicaid benefit is the one that we all pay into on a regular basis. And so I do have the folks that say, well, I don't want to qualify for the Medicaid. You know, that's for people that don't have money. Yeah, I get it, but I tell the story of, you know, the twins, Jim and Tim, who had a very, you know, parallel life, went to school, got married, went to work at the same place. And Jim and his wife were very frugal. They put money away. They, you know, they acquired some assets. Tim, on the other hand, didn't. He and his wife spent money as it came in. They put it right back out there. That's the way it worked. Well, Tim and Jim, you know, they have a stroke at about the same age. But because Tim had spent all his money and he didn't have any assets, well, he qualified for Medicaid. Jim, on the other hand, because he was frugal, doing all those things that, you know, we're told to do, he has to spend all his money until he doesn't have any. So the question is, you know, is that an issue of fairness? And I had this conversation with a lady once who said, you should never use Medicaid, da, 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 da. And so I told her this story, and she stopped and she goes, oh, that's how it works, isn't it? And I said, yeah. So we're kind of being punished for, being frugal. Not necessarily, but I'm just saying that the Medicaid is out there. And if you end up in skilled nursing, which is very expensive, you'll probably end up on Medicaid, but your path there may be that you spend everything that you have until you get there. The qualifications for Medicaid are $2,000 in assets. Can't have any more. If you're married, your spouse can have roughly $130,000 in assets. That's just not a lot. And so most people to qualify have to spend everything down. So if you had $250,000 in cash assets, you'd spend that down. So you have $2,000, and then you could qualify. If you have a house, similar thing, you can qualify by still owning the house, but you can't sell it. If you sell the house, then you'll no longer qualify, and you'll have to spend down the value of the house. Now, if you've visited with Justin and you've put together a financial plan, and this is part of it, great. Because you've walked through that, you've looked at the options, you've presented that to a professional who's helped you to look at that. That's great. Most people, Justin, don't seem to want to do that. They seem inclined to leave some assets to the kids.
Yep.
And so
almost 100% of the time.
Yeah. So if Medicaid for you is something that you're thinking, well, if I could do that but leave assets to the kids, you got to get going now. Take care. That planning is something that needs to start sooner rather than later, at least 5 years beforehand. Well, why is that? Well, because any gift made within the 5 years previous to filing the application causes what's called a penalty period. It's a period of time that Medicaid won't pay the benefit, even though you otherwise qualify. So that penalty attached to making a gift, say you're trying to gift that to the kids, if you do that within the 5 years, it isn't going to work. So you need at least a 5-year lead time to sit down and work through that planning. Now, if you think that that's a possibility for you and you want to preserve assets and maybe long-term care is not available to you, then that's when Justin and I work together, try to figure out at least a 5-year period. If something happens, that we've got a 5-year period that we can now go, all right, we got 5 years, there's some things we can do on this end, and then we're covered for 5 years, and we've preserved assets, and now we can file for the benefit. And Justin, 5 years is often doable for people, isn't it? Try to get 5 years worth of coverage.
Yeah, it really is. And it's very affordable if you're looking at either traditional long-term care type of benefit or even through a life insurance policy with a long-term care rider. It's very affordable for most individuals if they are young enough and approvable through underwriting. It can be very, very, very good. And even if they have enough assets to pay for 5 years, self-fund 5 years, it doesn't take as much money as it would for 10 years, obviously, or trying to plan for a lifetime. With a 5-year plan, we can be pretty definitive with that amount of time.
Yeah, and so couple of ways to approach that. One is to sit down, which is a recommendation, by the way. If it doesn't happen now, we will still talk to you. We will still pick up the phone and we'll give you some options. But right now you could put your planning in place and say, if something happened, I've got 5 years worth of coverage, or 4, or 3, and then you use some assets to fill in the gaps. And then I can make sure that I've got everything taken care of so that within that 5 years, I'm covered with private money, whether that's my own or I'm using the insurance. The insurance is a good plan right there. And then at the end of the 5 years, we've protected all these assets for the benefit of the kids. And we could go on to the Medicaid program if we want to do that. Now, a couple things to think about. If you've put together a plan like this for the benefit of the kids, because that's what you want to do, that's awesome. But what's really awesome about that is that if you set that up correctly, then the kids have access to some funds to make your life a little bit better. There are just some things that Medicaid won't pay for. And there are ways for the kids to contribute to, money to your care and get those things that they could get private pay that you wouldn't get on Medicaid. So that's something to keep in mind, that it's great you're planning for the kids, but at the same time, you can actually make the quality of your life a little bit better. Now, I work with enough of a particular generation, they don't worry so much about themselves. It's like, I've got to save this for the kids. And so, we're not going to touch that. Justin, you've probably never seen this. Oh, that account, that's for the kids. You need something to live on. No, that money's for the kids. Well, if we do the planning correctly, we can take care of the kids, but there might be a little bit to make your life, to improve the quality of your life. Now, if you're one of the kids, call me. because that kind of planning it does a good job of, one, allowing you to take care of mom and dad, make sure that they have a high quality of life and that they're taken care of. And then 2, and I know most of you don't care, there might be something for you and your siblings. And that's what mom wants. That just every time, that's what mom wants. But if I can get mom to plan for the kids, we set aside a few assets to take care of her. Okay, so recap on this, Justin. We talked about some different ways to pay for long-term care. We talked about using our own assets.
Yep.
We've talked about going to the folks that do this, for a living. They figure out all the costs and the benefits, and so that you can pay them some money. And usually you multiply the effects of the money, right? The money that goes in, you're going to get more back out. That tends to be how that works. And the sooner the better on that kind of planning.
Absolutely. And if I can share a quick object lesson. A couple weeks ago, I was trying to do a project at my house where I had to put some concrete screws into the ground to help hold the structure at our house down. And I had to put a total of 8 screws into the concrete. And so I was using a drill bit that I bought at Lowe's that was for concrete. And I was just using my regular drill, thinking, oh, this will be okay, this will be fine. And I spent about 3 hours trying to drill the hole into the concrete using what I thought was the right tool, right? The concrete drill bit. But what I really needed was what's called a hammer drill. My neighbor, he's a contractor, he has every tool in the world. And so I didn't want to ask him. My pride was too much. I said, I'm not going to ask him because he's going to make fun of me and he's going to judge me and I'm not going to talk to him. And after about, like I say, 3 hours and my daughter saying, you should just go ask your neighbor. And I finally gave in and I asked him, and I kid you not, I put that hammer drill in and I got all 8 of them drilled in less than a minute. I had spent 3 hours with what I thought was the right tool. And with the right tool, it actually took me less than a minute. And I think that all of this is very applicable to us in this situation, whether it be financially or legally. There are so many tools out there, and with the right tool, we can accomplish the task at hand most effectively. But it takes the right tool for the individual.
Well, and then that's our job as professionals, to know the toolbox, to have the tools, to understand the tools,
Right.
and how they work, so that we can turn around and make those suggestions, do the education, help people make good decisions concerning about which tool to use according to where they want to go.
Right. And my neighbor did not make fun of me, by the way. I thought he was going to, but he didn't. And he said, "Why didn't you come to me 3 hours ago?"
I wondered if he would say something like, you know, you could use this, it would have worked just fine. Well, thank you, Justin. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all of you that are online with us today. We appreciate your being here. We hope that something that we provided today, some of the information, and you can use the stories. They're not copyrighted. If you want to make fun of me, and Justin's pretty good too, if you want to make fun of us and say, hey, these knotheads, they did this thing, fine. If it helps you to serve those folks that you are trying to, you know, provide help to, whether that's your own family, whether that's clients, our hope is that today you learn something that will make their lives better as well as your own. Parting shot then, yeah. Justin?
No, thanks for having me. This has been great. If you want to sit down with us, you can reach us at our website at myadelant.com, or our phone number is 208-724-2291. We'd love to sit down with you and talk about all of the options and tools that are available to you.
And it's never too soon to do that.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody, take care, stay safe.